I wasn't expecting to find hope in Krakow. I had come anticipating a trip of memory, a tour of places where Jews used to live and where they died. I had come with 26 of our congregation's 11th and 12th graders on the Shirley Barish Memorial Israel experience. We spent a week in Poland as a foundation for our 3 weeks in Israel. We were prepared to find ghosts in Poland. We did not expect to find hope there, too. The hope was not evident at first. Less than 24 hours after we arrived, we were touring our first death camp. We entered Auschwitz under the sign reading Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free. In one barrack, I was paralyzed by the sight of tens of thousands of shoes bearing chilling testimony to their previous owners. We lit yahrzeit candles and recited memorial prayers in the shadow of the rubble of the crematoria at Birkenau. Our students cried and held each other up. The scope of the atrocity remains incomprehensible even up close. Examining the mechanics of this factory of death, it's hard to imagine how hope can live at all. That evening was Shabbat, a Shabbat we desperately needed. We celebrated at the JCC in nearby Krakow. The neighborhood was once home to a vibrant Jewish world, but now most of the synagogues are museums to a lost community. And yet, the seeds of Judaism are sprouting again. The JCC's exterior is unassuming, but inside it is bright and cheerful. It is home to a Sunday school and adult education lectures, to yoga and a senior club. Our group held our own Shabbat service. As we prayed and sang, we let the peace of Shabbat revive us. Then we joined locals and groups visiting from all over the world for a dinner in a small, overflowing social hall. A rabbi visiting from Toronto led blessings. Our students smiled, discovering that the melody for Kiddush is roughly the same everywhere. After dinner, the rabbi led us in the singing of Zmirot, Shabbat songs. He asked me what songs our group knew, and together we sang, Kol haolam kulo, Gesher tsar meyo. The whole world is a narrow bridge. Then the president of the JCC quieted everyone for some announcements. This too is the same wherever you go. When he finished, everyone except us, as if they had been waiting for this moment, joyously exclaimed, "Teach us Torah, Pani Zosha!" An 82-year-old woman, tiny in stature, walked to the front of the room. In Polish and through her translator, Pani Zosha explained that her Devar Torah would focus, as always, on feminist themes from the Parsha. Her insights were erudite and thoughtful, funny and a little bit radical. We listened with rapt attention. I was desperate to learn more. Who was this diminutive feminist firebrand, and where did she come from? Later, I learned that Pani, or Madame Zosha, whose full name is Zofia Radzikowska, was born in Krakow in 1935. She survived the war hiding under a false identity in the villages outside of the city. Little was left of Jewish life in Krakow after World War II, and even left after the communists, but Pani Zosha outlasted them all, and now she and her friends are bringing Judaism back. At the JCC, she sings in the choir and edits the monthly newsletter. Her work with Christian-Jewish dialogue has been recognized internationally. Hope is alive and well in Krakow, and Pani Zosha is teaching it. But what makes a woman who has seen horror and devastation stay to rebuild her community brick by brick? Something in her soul, after 82 challenging years, has kept hope alive. I'm not an optimist, which is a difficult thing for a rabbi to admit. I'm not a pessimist either. Hand me a glass half filled with water, and I will explain to you that the glass is twice as big as it needs to be. I'm whatever that is. And I'd like to think that that is hope. This is the remarkable thing about the Jews. In spite of trials and tribulations, in spite of pogroms and persecutions, Jews remain hopeful. In the words of Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, to be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Judaism is humanity's faith in the future tense. The Jewish voice is the voice of an inextinguishable hope. There's an old joke that every Jewish holiday can be summed up by, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. That is a hopeful joke. That is a joke that looks at the tragedies of the past and says, past the blintzes. When a Jew is asked, has the Messiah come? The answer is, od lo, not yet. Judaism is a religion of the promise to be fulfilled, of more work to be done, of a story not yet complete. Think of your favorite story. In all likelihood, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But in the Torah, the foundational Jewish narrative, a story is always unfinished. In Genesis, God promises Abraham that his descendants will inherit the promised land of Canaan. But the book ends with his great-grandchildren living in Egypt. Deuteronomy ends with the people in the wilderness, about to cross over the Jordan River back into the promised land. The story always stops just before the end. The Torah is a story of od lo. It is not yet finished. The story without an ending calls us to be the authors of the next chapter. We are a people who looks towards the future. Even the word Yisrael, from which we draw our people's name, is in the future tense. When Moses first meets God at the burning bush, God's name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This is also in the future tense. I will be what I will be. God, like Israel, is always becoming, always growing. And in that becoming, in that not yet-ishness, is hope. Rabbi Sacks makes a distinction between hope and optimism. Optimism, he explains, is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the understanding that if we work hard enough, we can make things better. An optimist always sees the glass as half full. We hopeful people see the glass as unfinished and go to get more water. Sacks continues, optimism is a passive virtue. Hope an active one. It needs no courage, only a certain naivete to be an optimist. It needs a great deal of courage to have hope, because God never promised that the world would get better of its own accord. Hope is not the assurance of progress, only the possibility of it. And hope is our belief in our power to shape the future. On Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Silk spoke about the powerful opportunity to choose our attitude in the face of the unexpected when we are tempted to say, I didn't sign up for this. The decision to hope is one such choice, because here's the secret that Jews have figured out over the last 4,000 years. Hope is not passive. Hope is not a disposition you're born with. Hope is not the absence of tragedy. Hope is a choice. Not a naive choice, but a courageous choice, a radical choice. Philosopher Jonathan Lear says hope is radical because it is directed at a future goodness that transcends our ability to understand. We hope for a future we can barely imagine so that we can make it a reality. Pani Zosha lived through destruction and degradation. She could have given up. Who would have blamed her if she had decided she had no strength left to rebuild a Jewish community from ash? She chose hope. She says she had a moment where she realized, my life is not some coincidence. It is decided somewhere. There is something outside this world that cares about me, and I am supposed to say yes to this. So I did. As our father Abraham said, Hineni, which means I am ready, so also I think I said yes, I am ready. Something deep in Pani Zosha's Jewish soul called her to say yes. Yes to a vision of the future. Yes to the possibility of tomorrow. Yes to hope. I'll admit, I've had a lot of trouble lately choosing hope. In 2018, the word on everybody's lips seems to be fear. Fear drives so much of our nation's decision-making on all sides of a political spectrum. Fear of the other, fear of each other, fear of losing. In a state of fear, we cannot make creative decisions. As neuroeconomist Gregory Burns writes, fear prompts retreat. Just when we need new ideas the most, everyone is seized up in fear, trying to prevent losing what we have left. In one study, he gave people a choice between a small shock that they had to wait for or a bigger shock that came immediately. A significant number of people found the fear of waiting so troubling that they would choose the higher voltage. Let that sink in. They chose more pain to avoid feeling fear. Think of the pain we tolerate when our short-term fears blind us. Judaism reminds us that it doesn't have to be this way, that the opposite of fear is hope. Gesher Tsar Me'od, that song we sang Shabbat in Krakow, is a quote from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, but the most important part is not to be afraid. The world can seem dark and scary, but we cannot let this fact paralyze us. We must set out onto the bridge. We must try to live not without fear, but through it. To sing while crossing the narrow bridge is to live with hope. This is the message of Yom Kippur. Our observance begins with Kol Nidre, where we acknowledge that we may not be capable of keeping all the promises we make to God and ourselves. We look at the ark emptied of Torahs and imagine that it is our coffin as we shudder in the face of our own mortality. And we end the day with Ne'ilah, where God declares, I have pardoned in response to your plea. As we traverse this narrow bridge of this sacred day, we move from fear and trembling to hope and renewal, from the land of broken promises to the land of promises fulfilled. Yom Kippur invites us to choose hope. When we feel defeated, we can remind ourselves that change is possible because it is happening all the time. In January 1989, an East German official predicted that the Berlin Wall would stand another 50 or 100 years. But thanks to the power of popular protest and political pressure, the impossible became possible, and by November of that same year, the wall had fallen. It was brought down not by hammers and chisels, but by thousands of people who showed up to cross the border, by the overwhelming power of people united in their demand for change. Retelling stories of past progress reminds us that change is possible. Howard Zinn writes that there's a tendency to think that what we see in the present moment will continue, but what leaps out from history is its utter unpredictability. 2 days ago, my grandmother turned 99 years old. I am astounded when I think of all that has changed in her near century of life. When my grandma was born, women in this country didn't have the right to vote. Now, she's live streaming. Hi, Grandma. Thinking on this scale reminds us that change is possible and hope thrives in possibility. This is why Jews retell our history over and over again, so that we can be reminded that things can change, that they will change again with our help. This is the real power of so many Jewish holidays. Passover, Purim, Hanukkah. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Retelling these stories renews our hope. The words of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, which means the hope, declares, Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope is not yet lost. Our hope is bound up in our story and in the way we choose to retell it. Hope is rooted in our ability to keep an eye on the long arc of history, and it is strengthened by our understanding of our own power. Last year, a 21-year-old senior at Texas A&M Galveston named Austin Sept made a hopeful choice. When the floodwaters of Harvey started to rise, he saw a Facebook post from the Houston Police Department asking for folks to come help. So he hitched his boat to his truck and he drove towards the center of the destruction. Over the course of a day, he rescued dozens of people stranded in their homes. When CNN asked him what made him risk his own life, he said, I saw an area where I could help, so I went. Judaism teaches nefesh echad ke'olam maleh. If you save one life, it is as if you have saved an entire world. Austin Sept didn't think to himself, I can't save everyone, so why bother? Instead, he rushed to do what he could, and his boat joined a fleet of others who had sailed in to help where they could. Nefesh echad ke'olam maleh. One person can make a world of difference. When the task is large, fear wants to tell us that the boulder we seek to move is too heavy and we are too weak. But hope rests in the knowledge that we do not act alone and that my strength, together with yours, can move a mountain. I was 14 in April of 1999 when two young men opened fire on their classmates at Columbine High School, a 20-minute drive from my home. I spent that evening on the couch glued to the TV in shock and horror between my mother and my father, an elementary school teacher. I remember feeling so powerless, so afraid. In the days and weeks that followed, they told us we should be afraid of the trench coat mafia. So my school banned trench coats. This and so many other actions that address the symptoms and not the causes of gun violence did little to stem the rising tides of shootings in schools and other public places. In the years since, with Aurora and Newtown, Orlando, and Las Vegas, I began to lose hope that things would ever change. I forgot that hope is a choice. When a classmate opened fire this past Valentine's Day at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, the surviving students did not lose hope. Within days, they had organized a trip to Tallahassee. Within weeks, they had organized the March for Our Lives. They looked their tragedy in the face and said, we will not be paralyzed by fear. They believe that creative solutions are possible that will end the epidemic of gun violence in our schools, in our places of worship, in our shopping malls, and they are tireless in their demand for change. They do not let the size of the task deter them. They have made the radical choice to hope. Choosing hope fuels us to take action. In her book, Hope in the Dark, Rebecca Solnit writes, hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down the door with in emergencies. Because hope should shove you out the door. Because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and the marginal. Hope just means that another world is possible, not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action, and action is impossible without hope. Hope will not make our problems go away, but we cannot solve them without it. Each year, this holy season reminds us, choose hope, because hope can lead to action and change. When the days are long and the nights are dark, Jews choose hope. When Abraham heard the call of Lech Lecha to leave his homeland and head out to a place he didn't know, he didn't argue, he just went, because Jews choose hope. When an Egyptian pharaoh commanded Israelites cast their baby boys into the Nile, one mother wove her son a basket instead, because Jews choose hope. When a Persian official wanted to annihilate a community, a courageous queen spoke truth to power because Jews choose hope. When the Greeks desecrated the temple, a brave band of brothers fought back and rekindled the light because Jews choose hope. When many of our ancestors came to America, they left behind their homes and their families because they wanted to build a better life for themselves and their children because Jews choose hope. When Harvey rocked our community, we showed up with warm hugs and work gloves, and we rebuilt because Jews choose hope. When Pani Zosha looked at her community, she said yes to that force in the universe that was calling her to purpose because Jews choose hope. This is my New Year's resolution. I will not succumb to the forces that try to keep me afraid and immobile. I won't choose more pain just to avoid fear. I will aim for the space beyond fear that is more expansive, more creative. I will march out onto the narrow bridge singing. These holy days present us with a vision of a more just future, but we have to work to make it manifest, and we need hope to inspire us to action. We need hope to shatter walls of cement and ceilings of glass. We need hope to sustain us when the road is long, when the turns are unexpected, when the way forward is difficult or dangerous. So let us make the radical choice to hope in the face of fear, because that's what Jews do. Jews choose hope. Shana Tova.